Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dante Fortson here with Unmasking the Gentiles Part 4, the Sons of Japheth. So, today we're going to get into some more, I guess, when I say foundational type stuff. We're going to lay the groundwork for a lot of the Gentile study that's to come, and we're going to do some connecting to various points in history. Not going to get super deep into the history of all the sons today. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on the sons and grandsons very briefly, and then some of the sons we're going to get into a little more in depth as the series plays out. So before we do that, let me go ahead and touch on the prayer request in the forum. So Yoruba asked for prayer for his finances, and he said that the prayer has been answered. He posted that update in the forum. And shout out to Michael for following up with him. I believe, it was Michael that followed up with him about that situation, which led to Yoruba posting an update. Tanya Gets Real is still asking for prayer for her family's health and issues, or her family's health issues. Yashika Black, her husband's salvation and restored marriage. Deloise family feels like it's being torn apart. Nicole for her anger problems. Tracy's children's salvation. Courtney, Braden, and Bryce. And there's a new prayer request. Destin is praying wants prayer for skin inflammation and hyperpigmentation. So again, shout outs to Michael and Adrian for following up and posting prayers in the forums. If you want prayer, if you want to request prayer, if you want to pray for anybody, go to bhitbforums.com. And there are a couple of topics in there right now that are getting some action. The conversation about whether or not wisdom is the Holy Spirit. And then there is another conversation about sacrifice that is starting to pick up. So if you want to jump into either one of those conversations, go to bhitbforums.com. All right. For those that want to support, go to patreon.com/Dante Fortson. It is only $1 to become a patron. For those that want to support via Cash App, you can use hashtag BHITB. The PayPal support link is in the description. And whenever you catch a live, you can support via Super Chat if you would like by clicking the $ underneath your chat box. All right, so today's study is brought to you by Unmasking the Gentiles, the European plot to replace Israel. We're going to touch on some of that today, and also Undeniable, full color evidence of black Israelites in the Bible. It just presents the history as is, the hard evidence. When people want to argue history and context and everything else, just show them the pictures. Let them argue against the hard facts. All right, so thumbs up, everybody, please. If you have not clicked the thumbs up button yet, please do so. If you have not subscribed yet, please click the subscribe button. If you are already subscribed, please click the notification bell and click all notifications. YouTube has added a new feature that allows creators to see how much of the bell notifications go out. I know some people thought that YouTube was, or maybe they even were, YouTube was not sending out notifications to all their subscribers. The new analytic kind of lets you see, assuming it's true, which I don't see why it wouldn't be, but it does let you see how many notifications that they do send out. And I have noticed that they don't always send out all of the notifications. Most times it's above 94%, but I think the lowest I've seen them send out is 94% of the notifications. So if you do want to be notified, make sure you click that bell. That's my point. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. And we're going to start out with a quick recap of last session. So Japheth's, well, not just last session, what we covered so far in the first three. Japheth's line is identified as the Gentiles, or the Hagoyim, in Genesis 10. We talked about that. And last study, we talked about my theory that is possible. Again, I never said this is a hard theory or doctrine you have to accept. I'm just pointing out the possibilities that Japheth and Shem may have been cursed. Let me see what else we got. Here we go. God cursed Israel to be made jealous and angry by a foolish/stupid nation. Yes, we covered that in part 1. If you have not watched parts 1 through 3 of the series, make sure you go back and watch those so you have context. I'll talk about that in a second. Japheth's name comes from the root word pithi, meaning foolish, which is the connection from Japheth to the foolish nation. And when I talked about last time, the Lord deceiving Japheth. Now, when I pointed out that that to me sounds more like a curse than a blessing. I mean, you can look at it however you want to. It still ends up how it ends up. The descendants of Japheth will go into servitude. The descendants of Ham have gone into servitude, and the descendants of Shem have gone into servitude. So when you look at the context of what Noah said to Japheth, it doesn't seem to be a blessing. It seems to be a curse. Deception is not a blessing. And we're going to get more into some of that. And we got into the root word of the Japheth's name, 3315. And it says it's from the word patah. And we got into patah, and we looked at this, which means to be spacious or wide open. And we also looked at the alternative definition, 6601b, that says to be simple, allure, became, enticed, deceived, deceived, enticed, persuaded, prevail, seduced. So this right here, let me see. We'll get into it. All right, there we go. This right here I didn't cover last time. Simple as substantive, concrete, open to instruction of wisdom or folly. Meaning they can be taught one way or the other very easily. Or, as it says here, foolish, simplicity, or a simple one. You're going to see this over here. But anyway, that's just a quick recap. If you guys want the full on breakdown of the word Japheth, go back to the last study, part 3. Now, I know I get a lot of comments. A lot of you guys want to jump straight to the Northern Kingdom and the New Testament and all kind of other places. But what I do is I take my time and I build up everything starting from the foundation. So that way we have something to draw back from. The problem is with a lot of these people who call themselves teachers out here, they want to give you a conclusion and then they want to go back through the Bible to find stuff that supports that conclusion. They disregard everything else. And then they often will tell you to throw out stuff like Paul. And we're going to be coming back to Paul over and over again. There's a Galatians study coming, at least a 2-part series on the book of Galatians, because a lot of the stuff that Paul was teaching is directly from the law. And all these people out here playing law keeper don't even recognize the gospel in the law when they see it, which is why they're teaching some of the stuff that they're teaching and telling people to throw out Paul. And it's just a lot of confusion out here by people who don't want to start with the foundation and then build up. So that's what I'm doing. So we'll get to certain parts as we get to them. So let's start with Genesis chapter 10, verse 1 through 5. And then we'll talk about the sons or descendants of Japheth. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tyrus. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz and Riphath and Togarmah. And the sons of Javan, Elisha and Tarshish, Kittim and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after his families, in their nations. So we covered the breakdown of Genesis chapter 10:5 already in part 2. We started talking about the usage of the word goyim. And so now we're going to look at the sons briefly. Now, one of the things that Europeans have done is they've kept very, very good track of European history. And so there is a ton to draw from when you go look at European history. In fact, in most schools around the United States, the majority of what we learn all year is European history. I definitely learned more about European history than I did Black history in my whole 12 years in school. Now, the reason I say that is because every Black history, we went over the same people. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. They definitely didn't teach us no Malcolm X. But we basically went over the same people. George Washington Carver, Harriet Tubman. So that's what we learned over and over and over again. But fortunately for us, my throat's a little dry. Sorry about that. I have to take a drink. But fortunately for us, they kept vast records on their history and everybody else's history up until around the late 1800s, going into the early 1900s, when they wanted to start covering up who we were or who we are. And so then they started to kind of write themselves into Africa and write themselves into the Shemite line and everything else. So we have Gomer. We start with Gomer. So the sons of Japheth, Gomer. People believe Gomer to be the founder or the originator of the Galatians, the Gauls, and the Celts. And we're going to get into the Celts a little more during the Nephilim giant study when we talk about some of the Celtic giants. But Galatians, you'll recognize that name from the New Testament. That is one of the churches that Paul wrote the letter to. And we're going to do at least a 2-part, maybe a 3-part study on the book of Galatians, because there is a lot in there that Paul talks about that has to do with ethnicity. And there's a lot that Paul has to talk about that does with preaching the gospel directly from the law of Moses. So we'll cover that then. And you have Magog. Magog is going to come up. Most of us have heard about Gog and Magog, so that's going to come up when we get there. They are believed to be the ancestors of the Scythians, the Ukraine, Russia, and Crimea. And one of the things you're going to notice is that some of these overlap with each other because of the area they're in. So you'll get multiple names that are attributed to a country because sometimes they occupy different parts of that country. So again, the Scythians, Ukraine, Russia, and the Crimea. Madai is going to be the Medes and the Kurds. Matter of fact, let me go back here. The Galatians, if I didn't point this out, but yeah, Galatia's right here. And then we have Magog, which is going to be Russia, Ukraine, all of this stuff all around over in here. And we might talk about the Scythians as we move through different parts of the Old Testament. The Scythians will come up. All right, so Madai, the Medes, and the Kurds. So you're going to have Kurdistan here. And the Medes you may recognize from the story of Daniel, where you have Darius or Darius the Mede. And you're going to notice something, that he is black. If true, if the Medes do come from Madai. And we're going to talk about that once we get we're going to get more in depth into the Medes. Some of you have been asking me, how did Japheth turn from black to white? What happened there? We're going to talk about that. We're going to get into the study of the Neanderthal. We're going to talk about what the book of Enoch has to say about it. We're going to talk about the different curses. We're going to talk about all this stuff. It's not going to be overlooked. I just haven't got to it yet, but we will. So then you have Javan, the Greeks, and here's Greece over here, close to Rome or close to Italy. Rome is in Italy. And this is where Alexander the Great is going to come from. And Alexander the Great is going to conquer the known world, or what they say was the known world at the time. And he's going to force everybody to speak Greek, which is going to ultimately lead to the Hebrew Bible being translated into what we know as the Septuagint or the LXX. So that's going to originate from the empire that starts from Greece, or the Greek Empire. Tubal. You have Iberia, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Again, some of these are overlap. So Italy, Spain, Portugal, and you're going to have Iberia. And we're going to come back to Tubal. Tubal is going to play an important part when we get to the, we talked about slavery in the Addressing the Evidence series. The Portuguese and the Spanish were deporting the black Jews into Africa, or to West Africa more specifically, or where we find the kingdom of Judah. And I'm going to do a study on the kingdom of Judah. It's going to be Addressing the Evidence part 7. I'm working on it right now. It should be finished in the next few days. So Addressing the Evidence part 7 is coming, and it's going to be a full study on Witta. And I'm going to touch on Tubal again during that study. Meshech, Georgia, and Armenia. Some of you may remember Georgia from the news. I believe it was Russia a few years back when Russia attacked Georgia, and they had that conflict going on. It didn't last too long. But Meshech is believed to be the origin of Georgia and the Armenians. Tyrus. They're going to be linked to Thrace. And Thrace comes up a lot more in mythology. And as you can see, it encompasses a little bit of Greece and some of Bulgaria. But Thrace is going to come up a lot in Greek mythology. It's where several heroes are from, and other events take place in Thrace. We may touch on Thrace during the Nephilim giant study. So now let's talk about the grandsons of Japheth. Those were the sons of Japheth, and it's important to understand exactly who they were. So when we get deeper into the study, we can always point back to them and say, okay, these people originated with Japheth. So this is where they fit into the context of history, in the context of scripture, in the context of prophecy. And remember, these people are referred to as the Gentiles, the Goyim, or Hagoyim. So Ashkenaz. Most of us recognize Ashkenaz for several reasons, but we touched on Ashkenaz briefly, and Ashkenaz refers to Germany. And we see Ashkenaz is mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, verse 3. Now, Germany's right over here. Germany is in Europe, for those that don't know. And the reason Ashkenaz is so important is because it's linked to the term Ashkenazi, and we know who goes by the term Ashkenazi. And so it raises a lot of questions for those who start to look. If Ashkenaz is linked to Japheth, who are these Europeans in the land? And when, of course, they denied being European, but then the DNA evidence comes out, which I've shared before. If you go through my videos, you'll see that the DNA evidence comes out that links them to Europe. And of course, you have Arthur Kessler's book, The 13th Tribe, that says that they are 8th century European converts. So Genesis 9:27, which is what we just covered in the last study, part 3, God shall allure or deceive Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. So when we look at this, and again, I don't believe this is a blessing at all. We see the word enlarge there. We went over the fact that it's translated as allure or deceive in every other place except for this one. And again, I talked about them having delusions of grandeur. They want to believe they are something they are not. And I'm not just saying that. I'm going to show you again. We covered this before, but I'm going to show you again in a second. So God shall allure and deceive Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. What are we seeing happening over there right now? We see descendants from the line of Japheth living in the land of Shem, subjecting the Palestinians to their will with the help of the United States and England. We talked about some of the Zionist Federation. That's what it is. Zionist Federation formed in 1899. We talked about the mandate for Palestine, the British mandate for Palestine of 1917 and 1920, I believe it was. I'm sorry, 1920 was the British mandate of Palestine. 1917 was the Balfour Agreement or Balfour Declaration. We talked about 1948, them getting the land of Palestine for their own through the intervention of United States and England and the League of Nations. So these people who are Europeans, it has been well documented that they are Europeans. Their name says that they are European, are living in the tents of Shem. And then we see another prophecy, which we briefly covered in the last study, part 3. O Lord, my strength and my fortress and my refuge in the day of affliction, the Gentiles shall come unto thee from the ends of the earth and shall say, surely our fathers have inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein there is no profit. So the same Gentiles, are, Japheth is referred to as the Gentiles. The prophecy in Genesis chapter 9:27 says they will be deceived and live in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. It says that eventually they will come and say, we've inherited lies. So all this stuff connects when you understand who's being talked to. And this is why it's so important to lay the foundation so that we're not jumping around saying things like, this is Esau. Yeah, I'm going to touch on that in just a second. A lot of these people who claim to be teachers will tell you that these people are linked to Ashkenaz, who's Japheth, and then they turn around and say, that's Esau. That's Esau. And again, I don't think it's that easy to identify Esau, but we know for sure this is Japheth. So if anybody's telling you this is the Ashkenazi are from Japheth and then also telling you that they're Esau, it can't work both ways. Esau is a Shemite. Ashkenaz is from Japheth. But I do have a personal theory, and I've said this before. I believe that Esau has mixed into more than one group of people. I believe they have mixed some into the Arabs, they've mixed some into the Europeans, and they've mixed some into well, let's just use the word black. That'll include Shemites and Hamites. People of black descent, whether Shemite or Hamite. So I believe Esau is not just, you can't just say that's a white man, so that's Esau. Now, one of the things that gets said about those of us who identify as Israel is that we are anti-Semitic because we say that they are not the real Jews. That doesn't make us anti-Semitic, because if we're Semitic and you're saying we're not the real Jews, that actually makes you anti-Semitic for those who say that. But number two, as I pointed out, they are from Ashkenaz. They call themselves the Ashkenazi. They are the ones who identify themselves as European descendants of Japheth. The DNA says that they are European converts. Arthur Kessler's book and other documented works say that they are European converts. All evidence points to them being Europeans and not Shemites or Semitic, or however you want to say it, Shemitic. They are not from the line of Shem. And so we have to deal with the verses in the book of Revelation, whether you like it or not. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So let's talk about this right now, because they say that we're bringing ethnicity into this, right? But the thing is, it's either us or them that are the real chosen people. We know this. We know that everything about them points back to them being Europeans from Japheth. But more importantly, the Bible says that the false group, or the false ones, are committing blasphemy. It says they are the synagogue of Satan. Now, one thing I find to be very, very hypocritical among those who identify themselves as Christian, whether black, white, or other, is that while they believed that these were the true Jews, they were supportive. They will say, God is going to bless those that bless you, curse those that curse you. We need to bless Israel. They were fine with the U.S. government sending billions of dollars a year to these people. They are fine with supporting Israel in their actions, regardless of how ungodly those actions are. And forget the number. I was going to count that, but I didn't start counting from the beginning. They believe one of the things that is taught in the Christian church, in some Christian churches, not all of them, and I'll say Eurocentric Christian churches, they teach that Israel has to wake up and call back the Most High. And yet they see a people waking up and turning back to the Most High, believing in the Messiah, wanting to call back the Messiah. But because of the color of our skin, they're saying, well, no, you can't be those people, because they understand that if we are those people, then what they've done is a war on God. But furthermore, it's hypocritical, because they were fine with supporting Israel until they find out it's us. And then when it's us, suddenly it doesn't matter. Ethnicity doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. They don't want to send us billions of dollars a year in support. They don't want to go invade another country and take land and give it to us. As long as they believe those Jews are Caucasian, they will allow it and they will support it. And again, like I said, black, white, or other, as soon as they find out it's us, suddenly it no longer matters. Suddenly they have every other reason in the world why Israel is no longer relevant to doctrine. And again, in Revelation 3:9, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, we see it twice in the book of Revelation. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. So the fake Jews are going to go worship at the feet of the real Jews. Simple as that. You can look at these people and tell that these people did not spend 400 years of servitude in Egypt as they teach. And again, for those, don't leave me a message saying we didn't spend 400 years in Egypt. I'm aware of that. That's why I'm saying as they teach. We know that this wasn't true. They didn't go to Africa and marry among Egyptians and Cushites and everybody else and remain Caucasian. That's dumb. I'm just going to say it like it is. That's dumb. And what did the Bible say? It says he's going to anger us by a nation full of stupid people. We know that's dumb. And the fact is, we didn't really think about it. Many of us that came out of Eurocentric Christianity, we didn't think about it as much as we should have. Why? Because the controls are there. Don't look at race. Don't look outside the Bible. None of this stuff matters. Everybody's saved, so the skin color doesn't matter. And so we didn't look. And had we looked, we would have known these people are liars. And had we used the maps outside of the maps they give us in the Bible, we would have discovered it earlier. Because if you notice in the maps, they always have a close-up of Egypt, so you can't tell it's in Africa. I don't think I've ever seen a map with Ethiopia in any of these Bibles produced, because then you would connect it to Africa. And so you see that the maps are zoomed in so that you can't see world geography too well. And so you don't even question it. And as an adult, a couple years ago, talking to another adult, and he was a white guy, and I believe it was on Facebook. Yeah, it was on Facebook. And I mentioned about Egypt being in Africa, and he tells me Egypt wasn't in Africa the last time that I checked. And I don't know like why that's acceptable in this day and time for an adult not to know that Egypt is in Africa and then call himself correcting me and saying Egypt wasn't in Africa last time that I checked. So I asked him, when was the last time you checked? Because it hasn't moved. And that was my response. And he checked, and then he saw it, and then there's nothing else you can say after that. Because now he has to come to terms with the fact that it sounds ridiculous that Caucasian people were in Africa under brutal slavery in the hot African sun building pyramids. It makes no sense. But again, we looked at the word 801, the word for foolish. This is the word we talked about in Romans chapter 10 and Romans chapter 10, the Greek word for foolish. It means without understanding, unintelligent, without wisdom, unwise, undiscerning, implying probably moral defect. That's why these same people can tell you to go back to Africa and then tell you black people weren't in Africa. It was all Caucasians. They'll tell you black people are from Ham and then tell you that Egyptians come from Ham, but Egyptians aren't black. They will tell you Canaanites come from Ham. As we just read in Genesis chapter 9, it said 3 times, I believe it was 3 times, that Ham is the father of Canaan. I know it said at least twice. Ham is the father of Canaan. And they will tell you Canaanites were not black, but Ham was black. They'll tell you Cushites were black and Ethiopians are black, but not the Egyptians and not the Libyans and not the Canaanites. Unwise, unintelligent, undiscerning. If we get down here, properly without comprehension, foolish because incoherent, failing to put facts together. They don't put the facts together. 70 AD, we're scattered in Africa. I covered this in the Addressing Evidence series. Multiple eyewitnesses from their own people and other people saying the Israelites are in Africa. We have history of the Limba coming down from Israel all the way into Zimbabwe. We have the history of them spreading out and going and settling in the kingdom of Judah. The maps show the kingdom of Judah marked as the slave coast after they were scattered into Africa. We see in the book of, we did a study on it in Addressing the Evidence series, how they would come across the Ethiopian Ocean from the west in ships. They were called the Gentiles. And then it started taking people from the slave coast, the kingdom of Judah. I showed you the evidence from Cambridge University in 1985 that says that slaves brought Hebrew and Judaism over here, and it may have been native to West Africa. I showed you the document from Henry Kissinger saying that the Igbos are wandering Africans or the wandering Hebrews of West Africa. We put together all this. Myself, Teo, and others have showed you guys all this evidence. Now, smart people believe it. Rational people believe it. But again, foolish people or stupid people don't. Why? Because they are without comprehension, foolish because incoherent, failing to put facts together. They're not capable of doing this. One, I believe, is because the fullness of the Gentiles is coming in. And I honestly believe that. I don't know how close that is. I'm not saying it's done, but we're starting to see that many people are moving away from the church, and we're starting to see the separation of the white church from black believers. Because a lot of people are coming out of the lie of Eurocentric Christianity. A lot of our people and some of their people as well. Right here it says lacking synthesis, describes a person failing to structure information in a meaningful way and therefore unable to reach necessary conclusions. This person is illogical because unwilling to use good reason. All you got to do is look at the urban apologists. There's a reason they won't respond to any of the actual historical evidence. All you got to do is look to the racist white Christians that follow Eurocentric Christianity and believe in replacement theology. They are illogical. They don't use reason. They aren't able to comprehend. They can't put the facts together. This stuff is simple. If the Egyptians painted themselves as black and Moses is mistaken as an Egyptian, clearly Moses is black. It's not because he's wearing eyeshadow and lipstick and dressed like an Egyptian and all this other nonsense, running around naked in the African sun as a white man. That's stupid. Again, there's no nice way to say some of this stuff. That is stupid, and yet they keep teaching it. So anyway, let's get into the grandsons further. Riphath, Paphlagonian, Celts. Again, we'll get into the Celts later when we talk about the Celtic giants. Togarma, the Caucasus. Now, the Caucasus, you're going to hear this come up too when we touch on British Israelism. One of the beliefs is that the Israelites, after being attacked by Rome, mind you, Rome controlled most of Europe. Their belief is that Israel got attacked in 70 AD and ran through Roman occupied territory to escape the Romans into the Caucasus Mountains, which were also controlled by the Romans. Again, that's stupid. When in the Bible, they always ran to Egypt because it was the opposite direction and the people looked like them and it was easier for them to hide. Why would a group of black people run among Europeans in European controlled territory to escape the Europeans who were trying to hunt them and put them into slavery? That makes no sense, especially since Egypt wasn't under Roman control. It would have made more sense to flee further into Egypt. And you had Hannibal of Carthage holding them off at the other end. It makes no sense to flee into the Caucasus Mountain. But again, let me go back. Failing to put the facts together. Again, this is how these people were described in the book of Romans. Elisha, Belgium, the Netherlands, and once again, you see Germany pop up. Like I said, a lot of these are going to overlap, and we're going to touch more on some of these as we go through. Tarshish. Tarshish comes up. Now, I did a lot of research on Tarshish for another reason a while back, but Tarshish is undetermined. I've seen multiple locations proposed as Tarshish, and all of them have good reasoning behind them. So I'm just going to leave that as undetermined, and we're going to touch on that more later. Now, Kittim. Kittim is linked to Cyprus, here, this small island right here, and to the Romans who originate in Italy. Now, Kittim is going to be interesting. We're definitely going to touch on Kittim because Kittim is going to lead to a study really in the Romans, and then Zepho. Zepho and Kittim, Zepho, who is an Edomite, he's going to do some mixing. They're going to do some mixing into Kittim. And so you're going to see the Romans and the Edomites start to join. Now, when we get into Kittim, or actually it probably won't just be a study on Kittim. Kittim will probably come up among other studies. But I'm going to talk about the possibility that why we see a link between the Limba and some of the Ashkenazi Jews, which again, I told you, I believe Esau mixed into a lot of people, is that some of the Ashkenazi do have Esau's DNA. And if Esau and Jacob are twin brothers, they have similar DNA, but it may explain why the Limba genes are stronger than the Ashkenazi genes. Because remember, Jacob and Esau are twin brothers. So if Esau mixed into other people, they would have genes. People always ask, well, how is it possible that they have similar DNA at all if the real Jews are black and Esau, or if the real Jews are black and the other ones are not? And again, I believe that Esau mixed into other nations, which if Jacob and Esau are twins, as the Bible says, they should have very similar DNA. Now, I'm not an expert on twin DNA, but I'm pretty sure. I want to say I'm about 90% sure their DNA is identical. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm not an expert on DNA, but I believe twin DNA is identical. But again, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong. put the information, a link to the information in the comments, and we'll touch on that, and I'll update it and correct it the next time or in part 5. And then Dodanim. Dodanim is the final grandson. This is going to be Rhodes, and Rhodes is this little island right over here. And some of you who are familiar with mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, have heard of the Colossus of Rhodes. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it is a giant statue of the sun god Helios. It was as tall as the Statue of Liberty, which explains the height of the Statue of Liberty. But notice the crown around his head, which represents the sun, and it looks similar to what we see with the Statue of Liberty. And that was given to the United States by the French, I believe it was. And I have to check that to make sure. But I'm going to get into some interesting history. In the next study, I'm going to get into some interesting history about Europe and Japheth, and some stuff I didn't know until somewhat recently, that Japheth was actually worshipped as a god in Europe. Did not know this, but I traveled around some racist European sites, some racist Christian European sites, dug up some information that they teach their own people, and I'm going to share some of that with everybody in part 5. Now, one of the things I did dig up in this journey was a chart. I'll call it the Japheth chart. It's going to come back up. And if you've noticed the pictures on the right, they've been ridiculous on purpose. Just because we're expected to believe that all these people were running around in Africa white. It's a funny thing to me. So on the left, we see this right here. Now, it's interesting. Again, what they teach their people is different from what many of us heard in the Eurocentric Christian church, sitting in the pulpit, or not the pulpit, in the pews. I'm guessing they were teaching a lot of this stuff behind closed doors and in private Bible studies, and you know, they're sharing their information with each other, but they're not telling us. So here's the chart. It says the Japheth, origin of the Greeks, the Aryans, and Aryans of India. And you'll see that term Aryan come up a lot when you get into some of the more British Israelism literature, I guess. Gomer, people living in the area of the Black Sea, Germany and Wales. Magog, reference to Gog, referring to Georgia, a region near the Black Sea, and Scythians. Madai, the Medes, Persia. Japheth, through Madai, fathers of peoples of India. Javan, people of Greece and Cyprus. Tubal, Russia, city of Tobolsk. Let me see here. Meshech, Russian name, Muscovy, city of Moscow. Tyrus, the Thracians, possibly the Etruscans of Italy. Ashkenaz, Germany, Armenia, Scandinavia, Denmark, northern islands of Europe and European west coast. Bripath, generally Europe, Carpathians and Paphlagonians. Togarma, Armenians, Germany and Turkey. Elisha, Greeks. Hellas is a form of the word Elisha. And we're going to talk about the Hellenistic Greeks. We're going to get into that too when we get further into this Gentile study into the New Testament. Now, Tarshish, Spain, Carthage in North Africa. It's interesting that they say Carthage in North Africa. We're going to talk about that as well. Kittim, the Greeks, Cyprus, Macedonia. Now, notice they don't link them to the Romans, but we'll come back to this. But they do link them to Cyprus. Dodanium, Greeks, Rhodes, and Dardanelles. So we'll touch on the Greeks for sure. There's a couple of people linked to the Greeks. We have Japheth, we have Kittim, we have Dodanim. So yeah, we'll touch on those. Now let's talk about some contradictory doctrine. I do want to address this because, again, we have a ridiculous picture here on purpose because, again, you have a stupid doctrine that teaches that this is Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and that Noah was a white man that his wife gave birth to this guy right here. And his brothers look like this. This is the doctrine that they teach. But that's not the only ridiculous doctrine out there, in my opinion. The two sets of Gentiles doctrine. To me, this is ridiculous. Number one, as you'll see, we're going through the Old Testament, and God is not the author of confusion. He's not going to spend the entire Old Testament giving you the background and description and everything else you want to know about the Gentiles, only to suddenly start calling the northern tribe Gentiles in the New Testament to cause all kind of confusion. It doesn't make sense. Some of these people are out here causing confusion. They call themselves teachers, and all they're doing is causing confusion. They'll tell you Ashkenazi Jews come from Ashkenaz, which is Japheth, but then they'll also tell you Japheth isn't the white man. Again, they're just out here causing confusion. I don't think some of these people listen to what they're teaching. They just say it. And again, it's not all of them. I'm not talking about all the people. I'm going to say it like this. I'm not talking about all the camps. A lot of the camps teach the above. There's two sets of Gentiles. There's the Europeans, and then there's the northern tribe, which is not true. I pointed out before, Paul is talking to his flesh. Paul says that he's talking to the Gentiles to make his flesh jealous. And of course, I get a comment of somebody saying, well, Paul's talking about the southern kingdom is his flesh, because the northern kingdom is, it doesn't even matter, because politics doesn't change flesh. If I don't speak to my cousin for 3 years, it doesn't change the fact that we're related. If I don't talk to my cousin for the rest of our lives until the day I die, it doesn't change the fact that we're related. Paul knew what he was talking about because Paul's a Pharisee. Paul is familiar with the law. And that's why Paul was quoting from Deuteronomy 32. This is right after they came out of Egypt, when they were all still one nation before the division into the northern and southern kingdom. So Paul's reference has to be used in context when he says we're going to be moved to jealousy, or provoked to jealousy and angered by a foolish nation. He was talking to those of his flesh, all Israelites, northern and southern kingdom. He wasn't differentiating between the two kingdoms. He was differentiating between two peoples. Gentiles in Europe, where he was when he said it in Rome, or he may not have been in Europe, but where he wrote the letter to, he's talking to them, not scattered northern Israelites, which is why he differentiates between his flesh, which again, why I'm going to get into the book of Galatians, because he makes some very distinguishing remarks there that point out the difference between the Gentiles and those of Israelite blood or nationality or heritage. He did not separate northern from southern kingdom when he was talking. And again, this is what I just covered. Northern kingdom are no longer related because they split over politics. It doesn't make any sense. That's a stupid argument. Again, it's no nice way to say some of this stuff, because a lot of these guys are out here causing division, and they're causing confusion on top of division. They want people to believe that there's not salvation for everybody, only Israel. And when they can't reconcile what the Bible says, they start changing everything. Ruth wasn't a Moabite. She's an Israelite. I keep covering this. Bathsheba wasn't really a Canaanite. She was an Israelite. The Hittites weren't really Hittites. They were Israelites. The Gentiles aren't really Gentiles. They're Israelites. Like, everybody becomes an Israelite when they can't explain it away. It's ridiculous, in my opinion. Then there's the Eurocentric Christian belief that Gentiles are all non-Israelites. Everybody's a Gentile. I'm going to point out something as we get through this, but in Genesis 14, you see Tidal, king of the Gentiles, and then you don't see the word Gentile used anymore until the book of Judges. If everybody's Gentiles, why isn't the word Gentile used in reference to all the Hamites they encounter between the books of Genesis and Judges? There's no explanation for that. And I point out that before, they change everyone to Israelites when scripture contradicts false camp doctrine. And again, all camps aren't out there teaching this false doctrine. I'm talking to the ones it applies to. And please don't leave me a message thinking you're the first person from a camp to ever tell me that there are two sets of Gentiles and which verses to look at. Yes, I've heard it. I've seen them. And they're all taken out of context by the camps. Well, the camps that teach this. It's just an attempt to twist scripture and to fit their doctrine instead of letting the scripture determine their doctrine. So who are the Gentiles? Let's just quick recap from what we learned so far from all the studies. They are descendants of Japheth, according to Genesis 10:5. A nation of foolish people, Deuteronomy 32:21 and Romans 10:19. There are people without a culture, Romans 10:19. We talked about that, how they adopt everybody else's culture, or the word we use is cultural appropriation. They just appropriate culture. Stargate is one of my favorite sci-fi shows of all time. And one of the things, the Goa'uld, they're basically cultural appropriators. They travel from galaxy to galaxy. They enslave people. They appropriate their culture, and they pose as gods for worship. Sound familiar? I could give a whole breakdown on how European society fits the Goa'uld of Stargate. If you've never watched Stargate, in my opinion, is probably one of the most ethnically populated sci-fi shows in history. Almost all of the good guys are black or Samoan or some kind of ethnicity. Most of the bad guys are white. And if you follow the mythology, a lot of it is based around Egypt. Some of it, like you have Imhotep, and you have some other African figures in the Stargate universe, but the majority of them are Egyptian gods. And again, there's a few other random African gods in the Stargate universe, but the Jaffa and a lot of the rebellion are people, black people. I'll say people of color, because it does include black people, Samoans, Hawaiians, and Asians, and all kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, if you never watched Stargate SG-1, seasons 1 through 10, you should check that out. And the importance of it is that MGM put out a sci-fi project when most other sci-fi projects are void of a lot of black faces. But they put out a sci-fi project that had an abundance of black faces, including black heroes as a main character. They're a nation that is not dark. We read that in Deuteronomy 32:21. We kept digging and saw that the Bible tells us that the Gentiles are a nation that is not dark. There are people used to provoke Israel to jealousy and anger. That's in Deuteronomy 32:21 and Romans 10:19. They are a people that will be enslaved. Again, I should have put a question mark here, but that's from Genesis 9:27, which we talked about last time. If the curse of Noah is literal, where he said Canaan shall be a servant of servants, and then he immediately tells Japheth that Canaan was going to be his servant. That, to me, in my opinion, would make be the reference that Japheth would too be a servant if Canaan's going to be a servant of servants. So yeah, Japheth will be enslaved, and we'll see that in the Bible. Not slavery in the sense that many people are thinking of it, but Japheth will go into servitude. And what we learned today, that the sons of Japheth populated areas of Europe. The Gentiles are the sons of Japheth that populated areas of Europe. And we're going to get more into this belief that Japheth populated areas of Europe. We're going to look at some of the beliefs around Japheth being worshipped as a god, lowercase g. And that's going to get kind of interesting, because I guarantee you, if you've not studied that before, some of the gods and goddesses, you're going to find that they're sometimes linked to regular people, and sometimes it doesn't add up. We'll get into Nimrod and Isis and Osiris and Semiramis and Tammuz. We'll get into all that in the Nephilim study. But yeah, definitely going to touch on Japheth being worshipped as a god, lowercase g, in Europe. So make sure you hit the thumbs up button, please, if you like the study. Make sure you hit the subscription button if you are wanting to get notified when we hit when I do part 5 of this series. And make sure you click the notification bell so you don't miss the notification, or actually so you get the notification. I don't think you get sent notifications if you don't click the bell. It may suggest it on your homepage, but yeah, click that notification bell. So if you have any questions about the Gentiles, I just needed to lay some groundwork today before we get into the next study. If you have questions, please feel free to send me a message. But with that said, until next time, I'm out.